Viewers, the war in Ukraine has now gone on for over a month and a half, and at this time there is a redeployment of Russian forces that is going on, because of which they have abandoned certain areas where they were trying to wage war and are pivoting towards the eastern Donbas region. Amid this, Shavan Sen, as part of Republic's crew in Ukraine, is in Chernihiv. Shavan, I thank you for joining us. Shavan, over to you. The Russian troops, I believe, have left Chernihiv, and you are right now uncovering the scale of the devastation that was witnessed there. Shavan, tell us more of what we have found in Chernihiv.
Well, in fact, we are in northern Ukraine in Chernihiv region. This is a region which borders Belarus and has been recently recaptured. We are inside a football stadium. A stadium that was bombed by the Russians on the night of 7th and 8th, it's the intervening night of 7th and 8th, around 4 o'clock in the morning is what we are being told. That very night, 7 to 8 missiles were launched. In this area, there was an aerial bombardment that's taken place. What you see just around me is the kind of devastation that's actually taken place, the damage that has been caused after the bomb was actually dropped. Let me just take you around. What you see is that this entire area has been completely flattened. Mangled remains of metals and plastic that you see right now of this very stadium, which is essentially used for coaching of children. Football coaching used to actually take place in this very area. But let me just ask Ravaji to come a little closer, because as I go right inside the football stadium is the crater that has been created after the bomb was dropped. And just take a look at this crater and you will understand the intensity of the bomb, or the magnitude of the damage. A 500 kilogram of bomb was actually dropped, and that's the reason why what you see right now, this is the kind of crater that has been created right in the middle of the stadium, the football ground that you see, and this huge crater that we have actually seen. Now, just to put this into perspective, a similar sort of crater, this size of crater, we had actually seen in another part of Ukraine. Again, that's also on the northern side, closer to Belarus. And that was in a place called Overuch and Malin, where we saw multiple such craters. But Chernihiv, remember, just till about last week ago, this particular city, the Russians were trying to encircle it. That's the reason why, if you see, as we are coming towards Chernihiv, there are many villages, one after the other, that's been completely flattened, because those are the areas where the war was actually taking place. But Chernihiv, they tried, at least the administration here, the authorities, the forces all put together, they tried to actually ensure that the Russians do not come inside the city. In order to prevent them from coming into the city, what they had done was there were several of defensive positions that were taken by the Ukrainian forces. But remember, what the Russians have been doing in most of these parts is that they were carrying out aerial bombardment. There were low-flying fighter jets that were being used, and all of them were basically taking off from the Belarusian soil. And we've seen this. If the northern side has been attacked, most parts of it has only happened from the Belarus border. In fact, while we were coming, Ankit, we've actually been very, very close to the Belarus border, because the straight drive from Kiev all the way to Chernihiv, because the bridges were basically destroyed, we couldn't come directly inside Chernihiv, so we had to take a detour. And while taking the detour, we were actually very close, barely about a kilometer away from the Belarus border. And as we entered the city, we have seen almost every place. What you see right now is actually a children's library. That's a children's library that has been damaged, that was adjoining this football stadium. And this stadium, what you see behind me, has been completely damaged. We have been told by the locals here that there have been 15 casualties in this very place. We are not very sure who are the people who are actually taking refuge in this football stadium. The identity of those who have lost their lives is still not known. But this gives you, just take a look around. As far as your eyes can go, what we can actually witness is the kind of destruction that has actually taken place in the city of Chernihiv. In fact, if you remember, after the 6th round of talks that took place in Istanbul, when for the first time Russians had actually indicated that they're going to go ahead with a military cutback. But the very next day, it was in Kiev and this very place in Chernihiv where there was large-scale shelling that was actually taking place. And there was an attempt that was made by the Ukrainians to intensify their operations to ensure that the Russians actually leave from this very place. Only days later, we have seen the kind of retreat that has taken place from the Russian side, simply because, remember, these are places where there have been intense gun battle that has taken place between both the sides. And the Ukrainians have been very successful in ensuring that at least the city center is not captured. And because they could not capture the city center, you've seen the kind of aerial bombardment that has taken place. And these aerial bombardments, because of the kind of missiles that have been used by the Russians, has led to large-scale destruction in most parts of it. Just once again, just take a look at this crater that has been created. At least from the naked eye that I can tell you, it is one of those larger craters that I've seen in most parts of northern Ukraine, because unlike what's happening perhaps where there's been ground offensive, the ground offensive has been much more. In places where they have not actually entered, they've carried out most of their they've used their aerial assets to try and carry out large-scale destruction, and it's quite visible. If you see in this very stadium, which I'm being told was a very popular spot here in Chernihiv, where children used to actually come here and take coaching. In fact, one of the football coach here has joined the army, and the locals here keep narrating about a story about how the football coach who's lost his life, he had actually put out a signboard outside this football stadium asking all his students to come back, and he had promised that he's going to be back and this football stadium would be open to them. But that never happened. That dream perhaps never materialized. Now, that's a story, that's an anecdote that I want to just tell our viewers of what we have been hearing while we were coming on our way outside there. We met about a couple of people I just wanted to gather some information as to what really happened. That's when I was actually told about this story, which is repeated time and again, often repeated, because this is somewhere for them, they're saying that these are symbols of joy here in the city that has been completely destroyed. And unlike what we have seen in some of the other places where military installations have also been targeted, in this city we have seen mostly religious institutions. Churches have also been attacked, and also these recreational grounds have been targeted by the Russians. So that's the question that a lot of locals have been asking. Why is it that these are the places that have been targeted so much? And also, not to forget, if you just see in the adjoining villages in the Chernihiv region, which we are planning to go in a short while from now, those are places where Russians had kept a lot of Ukrainians as hostages. We're trying to go across to a particular village where there has been a report suggesting that 200 Ukrainians were kept as hostages, and not just that, they were basically used as human shields. Now, that's important because, remember, right now, what the Ukrainians are trying to do is gather more evidence to try and find out how the Russians have flouted the international humanitarian law, and they're trying to gather more evidence to that effect. So we'll try and go across to those very places to get more details as to what's really happened. But with this city covered by Republic Media Network, in fact, Ankit, let me tell you, the war is only nearing 50 days, and as a network, we've almost covered the entire length and breadth of this country, documenting the kind of devastation that we have seen unfolding before our eyes. The propaganda is abound in most of these places. But the fact of the matter is that, and what we have seen by our ground reports, is that the devastation is just unimaginable, and perhaps rebuilding this country is going to be another mammoth task. Of course, the Ukrainians have been very successful in ensuring that there is a kind of a retreat for the Russians. They've gone back, at least from most parts of northern Ukraine, where we have been reporting right now from. The war has basically shifted towards the eastern side. The challenge has certainly increased for them down south and in the eastern side, because remember, strategically for the Russians, if at all they manage to capture some parts of the eastern and the southern, then remember, it's going to be a death knell for the Ukrainians, because at the end of the day, they're going to strike right in the heart of their economic corridor. So that's going to be the major challenge for them. And of course, with that, the kind of destruction that has been caused in most of the cities, at least in the northern side, it's only going to increase their challenge to try and rebuild. And as I see it, and Ankit, for almost 50 days put together as a news network, we've been seeing this kind of devastation day in and day out. And perhaps sometimes it gets very difficult for us to also narrate the difference between the one devastation in one place and the magnitude of the devastation in another city. Sometimes one gets completely numb, and that's exactly what's happening to us also when we look at the kind of destruction in most of these places, to try and understand what the people who have been staying here, the people who have been fighting this war, what perhaps they must be going through, Ankit.
Right. Shravan, I think it's fair to say that the visuals you have just showed us are nothing short of heartbreaking. The crater there right in the middle of a football field, about 10 meters perhaps in diameter, probably more, 4 meters it appears deep. Like you said, there's no reason or explanation for why this particular stadium was bombed. And from what you've shown us so far, that is also evidence and an example of the overall devastation that we are witnessing in many cities in Ukraine that you've been covering. I thank you, Shravan, for this report. We look forward to more such reports from the adjoining areas, the villages in Chernihiv that you visit. Thanks, Shravan.